Now I love a good sauce, and the French are famous for them. And I'm kind of craving fish, so today we're learning 3 easy, delicious, and essential French sauces for fishes that everyone should know how to make, including cooking 3 different fishes 3 different ways. I want to thank our sponsor today, BetterHelp, but more on them later. But before we get started with our first sauce, Beurre Blanc, we have 3 fish here: salmon, black sea bass, and lemon sole. When I get fish, I like to take them out of their packaging, dry them of all that gunk that they're kind of sitting in. And if I'm using skin, I will leave it uncovered overnight to dry the skin out to get it extra crispy. So I did that with the salmon and the sea bass, and then I just covered the lemon sole, placed them in the refrigerator overnight. So we're starting with the salmon. Now the first order of business for the salmon is, now that the skin has dried out overnight, I'm going to remove it. So I'm basically gonna take the short end, I'm gonna make a small incision down at the tapered end with my knife, slightly angled towards the cutting board. With the knife angled down, you will not cut through the skin, but if your knife is angled flat or upward in any way, you will cut the flesh of the fish. And once you've made that incision, you should be able to grab a little piece of the skin, and you're gonna use that for tension as you wiggle your knife with that slight downward angle all the way until your knife releases on the other end and the flesh releases from the skin. And that's how you cleanly skin a fish. So now what we're gonna do is place this on the sheet tray along with our fillet of salmon. Actually, before it goes there, we need to create the topping for the salmon. First thing I'm gonna do is season the salmon on all sides. Then I'm gonna take some Dijon mustard, and I'm just going to create a thin little layer on top for a coating to stick to. And then in a bowl, I'm gonna add, I don't know, maybe like a few tablespoons or a quarter cup of some Italian seasoned breadcrumbs, and then an equal amount of some panko. Gonna hit it with a little oil, a little salt, a little lemon zest, right on top of the salmon. Mix up the breadcrumbs, soak them in that oil until it feels like wet sand, and then throw it right on top of the salmon. Just give it some nice coverage on the top surface of the fish, and then pat it in to get that coating to stick to the salmon. And then place the salmon fillet onto the baking sheet next to the piece of skin. Then I'm just gonna add a little bit more oil on top of the salmon, and then some oil on the skin. Also gonna season that skin with some salt, and then just get that skin coated in that oil. Now that's ready to be baked. Now for the Beurre Blanc sauce, we need about a tablespoon of minced shallots, and then 8 tablespoons of cold unsalted butter cubed. So let's cut some shallot. About a half of a large shallot should do. Just remove that weird part inside. Cut it in half like that. Separate them into bundles. Push down, slice very thin. Now line those back up and then mince them finely. And then get those into a bowl. And then next for the butter, we're just gonna cut the stick of butter into 4 smaller sticks, and then cut those sticks into little cubes. Now, Beurre Blanc means white butter, and it was created by a French chef in the late 1800s who was making Béarnaise sauce and forgot to add egg yolks, which is essentially what Beurre Blanc is, a Béarnaise without the egg yolk. It's rich and creamy, but it's also tangy with the addition of things like white wine vinegar, white wine, and a lemon. So we need about a half cup of white wine. I have rosé, so I'm just going to use it. All right, so we got a half cup of the rosé or the white wine. Now, you could just use a quarter cup of champagne vinegar and omit the lemon, but I'm gonna split the acid between some champagne white vinegar and the lemon. So I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of each. Right, 2 tablespoons of the champagne vinegar, and then 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. So now we've got our liquid ingredients, our shallots, our salmon, and our butter in the fridge. First thing we're gonna do is get the salmon in the oven at 475 degrees. It should take 10 minutes or so. The thing is, it's a thin piece of salmon, so the thinner the salmon, the higher the temperature I go. Now in a small pot on medium-high heat, add the wine, the vinegar, the lemon, and the shallots, and bring it up to a boil, and then reduce it down till it's only about a tablespoon left. Check on the salmon. The skin is crisping nicely. It's almost done, but the salmon needs a bit more time. By now, the sauce has reduced all the way down and concentrated. Lower the heat down to very low, and with a whisk in 1 cube of the butter at a time until it's completely melted in, and then continue whisking in 1 piece of butter at a time until it's fully melted. The skin is done, so I'm just gonna take that out of the oven before it becomes overdone. The salmon needs a few more minutes. And this is about it. It's pretty easy, however, you can screw this up a few ways. Here's what can go wrong and how to fix it. Number one, using too much heat. Too much heat can break the sauce. To prevent this, keep the heat low and steady. You could even use a double boiler if you want, but if you keep it low, you don't need to. Number two is adding butter too quickly. If you add it too quickly or all at once, that sauce can become overwhelmed and unable to properly emulsify. To prevent this, gradually add the butter one piece at a time. And number three is not stirring constantly. Beurre Blanc requires constant stirring to maintain the emulsion, so keep a close eye on the sauce and continue stirring with a whisk. And finally, the water content. If there's too much water or you didn't reduce enough of the acid down, it can make the emulsification process difficult. Make sure you reduce the liquid down before you start adding the butter. When the sauce is fully emulsified and the butter is all in, warm up a second pan and then strain the sauce through a fine mesh strainer into the warm pan. Then check for seasoning and it's ready to serve, and so is our salmon. To plate, pour a beautiful base of the Beurre Blanc into the center of the plate, then place the salmon on top, and then finally the skin as a garnish. All that butter sauce and acidity pairs so nicely with the salmon and with that crunch of the skin and the breadcrumbs. It's a match made in heaven. Now that's good, but we got more good on the way. Next up, we're making the sea bass with veloute. Now it's a new year, and in the new year, I was trying to rid my mind of all the gunk from last year. You know, all the negative judgmental comments, the tense relationships, family stuff. You know, everything about life that clogs your brain up. So that's why I'm using our sponsor today, BetterHelp, to release the valve whenever things get tense or anxious in my life. BetterHelp makes therapy easier and much less intimidating for many people. If you're like me and you've been to therapy in person, you know how annoying it can be. Sitting in waiting rooms, appointments always running late, just generally feeling exposed in a way. But with BetterHelp, you can talk to your therapist in private through your choice of video call, phone call, or you can even send them messages throughout the day as things come up, even if you don't have an appointment scheduled. BetterHelp can match you with one of over 30,000 therapists in their network based on your needs, preferences, and location, which gives you access to a wider range of expertise that may not be available in your area. To get started, you fill out a questionnaire that asks you all about the challenges you're going through, what kind of therapist you'd like, and then BetterHelp will match a therapist to you in most cases within 48 hours. Then you can schedule therapy sessions at a time that's convenient for you, and everything you share is completely confidential. And if you don't love your therapist, you can request a new one at any time at no additional charge. BetterHelp is giving my audience 10% off their first month when you use my link in the description or you visit betterhelp.com/notanothercookingshow to get started. Now, veloute is one of the 5 mother sauces in French cuisine, created by the renowned chef Escoffier, and is basically the foundation for many of the most amazing sauces on earth. And for this, we just need 1.5 tablespoons of butter, 1.5 tablespoons of flour, about a cup, maybe a little bit more of some light chicken broth, and some chives that I've chopped up very finely, and we're gonna use this as a garnish. And of course the sea bass with the skin that's been dried out overnight. Of course it's optional, but as you saw with the salmon and as you're gonna see with the snapper, it makes great skin. Now for the veloute, it's gonna start with similar situation to the Beurre Blanc. One pan is gonna be to sear the fish, the other pan is gonna make the sauce. And we're gonna turn the heat on to medium high, and we're gonna add in the butter. And a veloute is very much like a bechamel. Once that butter's in, we're gonna add equal parts flour. We're gonna stir it together to make a roux. Cook it for a minute to cook out the rawness in the flour. The main difference between this and a bechamel is that instead of milk, we thicken it with the light chicken broth. And I'm gonna slowly work that into the broth so no lumps form, and then stir it all together. And we're gonna need to bring that up to a boil and allow the thickening power of that roux to really come into effect. Now I'm just gonna swap pans just so you can see what I'm doing. Next up, we're gonna preheat that pan, and once it's hot, I'm gonna add oil to it. I'm gonna season both sides of the fish, and then I'm gonna place that into the pan and place weights on top. Make sure all that skin makes contact with the bottom of the pan. And I'm gonna cook it about 95% of the way on the skin side. And you could see the fish turning pale white as it cooks most of the way. Then all we have to do once that skin is crispy is flip it, let it kiss the other side. We can even turn the heat off, and then we can get that out of the pan. It should be fully cooked through, and we can finish the sauce. And it's a little loose, so I'm just gonna cook it down and reduce it till it's a nice consistency, till it coats the back of a spoon. Then we can check for seasoning, and then we're ready to plate. Again, pour a base of that veloute sauce right in the middle of a plate. Then we're gonna place the sea bass right on top, and for a nice pop of color and garnish, we're just gonna sprinkle in some of those minced chives. And there you have black sea bass with a classic veloute sauce. Creamy, neutral sauce. Even a touch of chive gives the sauce more character. That's why it's a mother sauce, it's a base for so much. Just by adding a little acid, a little stock, a little cream, it can go so many directions. And so learning the technique is something valuable in the home kitchen. And as good as this is, next up we have one of the most quintessential French fish dishes, sole meuniere. Now, meuniere is one of my favorite fish recipes to order out at a restaurant, but it's always the most expensive thing on the menu, masked by a market price. And it's usually because Dover sole is usually what it's made with. It's a rarer, more expensive variety of sole that goes classic with this dish, but we can do the same effect with something like a gray sole, or in our case, a lemon sole, which will work just fine and is much more affordable. And the sauce is basically just rich brown butter with acidic lemon. The combination of the two pair perfectly with a delicate white fish. So I have 1 fillet of lemon sole. I've also got 2 tablespoons of butter. Now I need about a half of the lemon. Parsley is also traditional, so I'm gonna chop some parsley up really fine. It is an elegant dish, so you wanna just make sure you chop the parsley up nice and fine so it looks nice on top of the fish at the end. Then I'm gonna cut about 2 chunks of lemon, roughly a half lemon, and then set those off to the side. Next up, all we gotta do is season the fish and dredge it in some flour. Now all we gotta do is sear it in a hot pan. Get a medium saute pan on high heat, and once hot, add a tablespoon or 2 of oil. Dust off excess flour from the fish and then gently place it in the pan. And if you have, place a gentle weight on top to make sure we get as much color as we can across the surface of the fish. And like the sea bass, our strategy is to cook this about 95% of the way on one side, sacrificing a mediocre sear on both sides since the fish is very thin for a great sear on one side and a well-cooked fish. Once you can see nice color on that side, give it a flip and kiss the other side with heat for about 30 seconds, then transfer it to a towel-lined plate. Now the pan is smoking. It's too hot to add the butter, so I can let it cool down while I prep my plate. Plate the fish and then squeeze a quarter of the lemon juice over the fish and the plate, and then sprinkle with parsley. Now back over to the stove. The pan is chilled out, so now I can add the butter, and we're simply turning this into a brown butter. And I'm using unsalted butter, so I'm going to season it with salt. Some people add capers, but traditionally it's just brown butter, lemon, and parsley. So we're keeping it simple, allowing the moisture in the brown butter to evaporate, leaving just the butter fat and the butter solids that will brown and caramelize into a nutty flavor and aroma. We want to take it slightly beyond golden brown, just like this. And now we simply dress the fish with the brown butter hot, so as it hits the fish, it flash fries the parsley, blends with the lemon juice, and of course, serve it with a wedge of lemon. And that is the classic and beloved sole meuniere. Rich, buttery, bright, and perfect. Now there's no nuts in here, but it has a amazingly beautiful roasty nuttiness to the dish. The butter transforms. Combined with the acidity of the lemon, you can always squeeze a little bit more on top if you want. It's balanced. Now these are all beautiful sauces, and you can play around with them. You could add some nuts to this. As you know, sometimes people use capers. Who cares? It's the basis of building a recipe you want out of flavors that you now know how to create. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. All these recipes are gonna be down in the description. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.